This is Goku Sun DBZ, and welcome to a discussion / review of a particular game series from Street Fighter Universe. And the music in the background will be music from that series. I thought I would discuss today, review, and talk about my personal favorite Street Fighter series. Now, it is true, as I've mentioned, that Street Fighter 2 Turbo / Championship Edition is my personal favorite in general Street Fighter game, but my favorite Street Fighter series, that honor goes to Street Fighter Alpha series, or Zero in Japan, of course. So you'll hear music in the background from Street Fighter Alpha 3, which I think overall has the best tracks out of the series, but yeah. Of course, we had 3 Street Fighter Alpha games, and these would be prequels to Street Fighter 2. It would take place around the same time period as Street Fighter from 1987, celebrating its 30th anniversary this year for the franchise. Alpha, of course, was originally debuted around 95 to 96 time frame, or rather Zero in Japan. And they would release the first one. It would come out about a year later here in the States. And a lot of people wonder what happened to characters like Guile and other characters like that. Of course, also characters like T-Hawk, Cammy, and others. We would see the introduction to a couple of characters that would become franchise staples in the series, of course. And couple particular characters we'd be introduced to, of new ones, which has become actually fan favorites over the years. One of them being, of course, Dan Hibiki, which was considered a strike back to King of Fighters for copying some Street Fighter characters. But Dan Hibiki is a hilarious character, honestly. He's good, laughs, and his interesting pink style, like though it was supposedly he screwed up in the laundry, is the story of how he ended up with pink martial arts clothes, but whatever. But yeah, he would be a staple in the series. Of course, we would also see the introduction in the Alpha series to Sakura, or as others call Sakura. Just depends how you want to say it. But she would become a staple, and some would see her as like the female version of Ryu because of her stances, but she would of course become a pupil to Ryu, obviously. We would see the introduction to a character with a very similar fighting style to Guile, since Guile was missing from this game. But we find out this guy is the man who trained and taught Guile his fighting techniques, like Sonic Boom. And of course that would be, which would also become a fan favorite, and has become very important to Street Fighter V's storyline. And of course that being Charlie Nash, or just Charlie. He definitely has become a big favorite over the years to a lot of fans. Understanding, and of course, Guile techniques was never truly able to master, which is why he has to use both arms when he does his Sonic Boom, where Charlie can do Sonic Boom with one arm, because he mastered those techniques, as well as, of course, the kick as well, which is something else that Guile would take. Now, then we would see the introduction of a few other characters, like Gin, which of course we find out was a good friend of Chun-Yi's father, and would end up taking Chun-Yi under his wing after her father would be murdered. And he would teach her martial arts style, which is why you see some similarities. He was a very important part of the first Alpha game, and he became a sub-boss in Street Fighter Alpha 2. And of course in Street Fighter series you still have Bison around, though he's a little bit heavier set look in the Alpha series, and unlike his normal taller stance and look and design, which you would see. And of course they would actually adopt that sprite design of Bison from the Alpha series for most of the Marvel vs. Capcom and like Capcom crossover games. We would also, of course, see as an official regular character. He was just a special hidden character in Super Street Fighter II Turbo and in the first Alpha game. But in Alpha 2, he would become an official normal character and has become a true staple of the franchise. And of course, that being, which would be on the cover of Street Fighter Alpha 2 with Ryu. And of course, that being none other than the big man himself, Akuma. Which, by the way, of all the Street Fighter games, not only is Street Fighter Alpha 2 my favorite Alpha game, Street Fighter Alpha 2 is right behind Street Fighter 2 Turbo for my favorite Street Fighter game of all time. Alpha 2 is easily my second favorite, and pretty much neck and neck for being my favorite in the franchise as a whole. And also up there, Alpha 3 is also in my top 5 favorite Street Fighter games I've ever played. Maybe even number 3, but in general, if you ask me at the top of my head what my 5 favorite regular Street Fighter games would be, Alpha series would hold at least 2 of the 5 slots. Because I love the character development and designs, I love the animation style, and that goes for Bison. They would give him the ability to shoot an energy ball besides his Psycho Crusher. He put up a decent challenge in Alpha, and Alpha 2, he put up a pretty good challenge. Alpha 3, though, he would become insanely OP. Hands down, I think Alpha 3 version of M. Bison is hands down the most difficult incarnation of M. Bison. Which, of course, if you play the Japanese version, Street Fighter Zero, you will notice Bison's name is actually Vega. That's because of some issues that were happening in America at the time, back in the early 90s, which is why they switched around names. In Japan, the one we know as Bison is called Vega. The one we know over here, Vega, is called Borog. And the one we know as Borog was M. Bison, or rather Mike Bison. Now, a lot of people will notice the design of who we know over here as Borog does have a lot of similar traits and designs to a certain former boxer, Mike Tyson. And think about that name, Mike Bison, Mike Tyson. Yeah, if you want to know the reason why these names were changed around in the 90s, because at that time there was a rape scandal going on involving Mike Tyson, so because of that controversy, Capcom did not want that swarming around their series, so they switched around the names. They make Vega, Bison, they made Borog, Vega, and they made Bison, Borog. So yeah, it can be confusing, but you will notice that if you play Japanese import version of the game, like I just got in the mail the other day from Japan, Street Fighter Alpha 3, or rather, Street Fighter Zero 3. This is the full Japanese import version for the Sega Dreamcast, which will go down, eventually this game would go down as easily, probably, one of the most praised 2D fighters of all time, and in a lot of fighting game fans' minds, there's quite a few people actually rank Alpha 3 as the greatest quintessential Street Fighter game ever designed. And it's no surprise with its illustrious library of 30 plus characters, which is not bad for the time period when this would be released. Now this is easily the best version you can get of Alpha 3, aka Zero 3. Now you can get a pretty good port, which of course was released in a collection called Street Fighter Anthology for the PS2 and the original Xbox, which actually is very much worth your time, because you have the original Alpha, you have Alpha 2, you have Alpha 2 Gold, an improved version of Alpha 2, Alpha 3, and then one called Gem Fighters, which actually would introduce an experimental system. It has kids' versions of the actual Street Fighter characters, and the gem, it would introduce something called the gem system. it was actually an experimental system which they would later adopt into a Marvel game called Marvel Superheroes, part of the crossover series of games, which would become, of course, known as the Infinity Gems, which we see is going to be a major part of the gameplay elements of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. And we also would see later on that system would also be adopted to, of course, another crossover called Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Would also introduce the gem system, but that was actually the very first game, and it was actually connected with Alpha Series. That was called Gem Fighters because it used the Alpha characters in the game, which is why. Now, of course, Alpha 3 would bring in some characters we know better from later Street Fighter games, such as, of course, we would see Guile brought into this game. Many other characters, like we would see pretty much the big four, as they're called. We would see Bison, you'll have Vega, you have Borog, you have Sagat, and in this series you'll be introduced to people who never played the original Street Fighter in A7, which never knew who that guy was in Alpha Series, which says Jaguar Kick, and uses the Muay Thai art style of course, Sagat. That is actually the, I guess you could say, the apprentice of Sagat. He would eventually want to surpass and take over the title as Master King of Muay Thai. And he is, actually a lot of people thought he was a new character for Alpha Series. He wasn't. He was actually in the very first game in the series. Dudley, surprisingly enough, also was in some earlier games as well. So you might be surprised to learn. Some characters you think that were new in the Alpha Series and stuff actually were introduced in the very first game. But Alpha would bring these characters back with updated, much better, of course, design and stuff. Much better, more anime-style sprites. That's the thing, the Alpha Series went with more of an anime look and anime design. So if you like anime, you'll appreciate these art style much more. And Bison, as I said, Alpha 3 Bison, hands down, is the strongest, best challenging version of M. Bison out. Especially with his Super Psycho Crusher ability. It's ridiculous. It does like 50% damage in one strike. Maybe even 60% damage. It's ridiculous. You can block the attack and it's still going to do about probably 15 to 20% damage just blocking it. Which is ridiculous to think about. But, in my personal opinion, the Alpha Series is hands down the greatest overall Street Fighter series of all time. And this has been a little bit of a discussion, slash down memory lane, but a discussion review on the Street Fighter Alpha franchise. Leave me a comment. Tell me if you'd like me to do a franchise discussion slash review on other Street Fighter games, like maybe the Street Fighter 3 series. Do a discussion about Double Impact, which is New Generation, Second Impact, and of course Third Strike. As well as talk about the many different versions of Street Fighter 2. Also talk about the Capcom crossovers as well. But you'll have to let me know and tell me what is your favorite Street Fighter game. What's your favorite Alpha game or your favorite character to play in Street Fighter Alpha series? But I am going to say I am planning on working in the near future on another discussion slash review for another fighting game franchise that I'm actually very much a fan of. And that is going to be a discussion slash review for a little, or actually major, Namco franchise called Soul Calibur. And eventually someday I plan on doing one as well about Tekken, in honor of Tekken 7 coming out later this year in June. But I'll see you all next time. And just so you know, I am going to be doing a game playthrough, hopefully today, for Street Fighter Zero 3, the Japanese version. So, stay tuned for that. And tell me in the future if you want me to do any more playthroughs, again, of Alpha 2, because I don't mind at all doing gameplays of the Alpha series. In fact, I like looking for an excuse just to play Street Fighter Alpha games, as well as Street Fighter 2. So, I'll see y'all next time here in YouTube Land. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. And to a certain troll out there, get lost. Get a life. Anyways, I'll see y'all next time here in YouTube Land. Follow me at twitter.com/GokuSendDBZ as well as at Google+.